Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.
Welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. Here now is your host, Chad Amond, President and CEO of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce.
Hello and welcome to Westmoreland Community Connections. I'm your host, President of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce, Chad Amond. I'm pleased to introduce a guest this morning that is going to serve you as listeners and teach you some things that probably you don't know. It's probably going to be a topic that is definitely timely given this time of year. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Tom Soltis. Tom, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chad. Glad to be here.
I just want to tell the listeners a little bit about you before we get in. Tom has been employed with Westmoreland County Community College since 1990. He teaches courses in sociology and anthropology. He is an award-winning professor at the college. He has won the Outstanding Teacher Award in 2001 and then again last year in 2016. So congratulations.
Thank you, Chad.
The students are loving you. He serves on numerous governance committees at the college and is active in new student orientation and as a student advocate. So your work at the college is very much appreciated throughout Westmoreland County. I know that for sure.
Thank you, Chad. And I've dedicated my life to the community college, and to me, it is the best system of education that we can offer here.
Well, Tom, tell us a little bit. Get a little bit deeper than the short bio that we gave. Talk a little bit about your background, how you got into to teaching sociology and anthropology. Where'd you go to school? All of that stuff.
When I started as an undergraduate, my original major was engineering, and it just didn't work. It just wasn't the major for me. So I took some other courses. I wasn't sure what I wanted to take. I sampled here, I sampled there. Finally, by tricking my academic advisor into putting me into a class that I really didn't have the prerequisite for. It was an upper-level sociology class called Society and Law. I sat in that class 20 minutes after the first session. I said, that's what I want to do. And that's been my goal the whole way through it, up to and including my doctoral dissertation. And then this is all I've ever wanted to do, is to teach sociology. Most fascinating subject to me I've ever encountered.
So a half an hour into the course, you knew that what you were going to do for your life.
Oh, I knew exactly. I had no idea what it was going to take. I had no idea how long it was going to take, but I knew that was what I wanted to do.
No kidding. Yeah. That's great. And did you see that with some of your students over the years? I mean, you've been teaching since 1990. It has to be a good feeling as a professor when you sit in a class and you're teaching your students and they have that same epiphany moment.
I'll tell you what, there is nothing like the feeling when you're making a point in a class and the students are with you and you can see that light go off in their head like, wow, I never thought of this before. I never thought of that connection before. That makes it priceless. And I have numerous stories of students that first couple days of the class, half attending, half not, kind of drifting away a little bit. You hit the right topic and their whole demeanor changes throughout the course of the semester. And to me, that's priceless. That they even go to take another sociology class, or some that have majored into sociology, to me is just fantastic. I can't put a value on that.
You talk about priceless. I had the opportunity and one of the primary reasons you're on the show is because I thought it was priceless. The presentation that you gave a couple of weeks ago at a public meeting for the community college on the Spanish lady. And for those listeners who aren't aware, the 1918 influenza epidemic that hit Westmoreland County, sometimes it's not gets the attention or maybe just people just don't really understand what happened. I had a jaw-dropping moment. It was definitely an eye-opener for me. So let's get into that conversation a little bit about the 1918 flu epidemic here in the county, and what kicked this off for you? What even made you want to study the flu epidemic?
What would be interesting is studying 100 million people dying. We have to go backwards a little bit. When I was a graduate student, had my doctoral dissertation not been on what it ended up being on, it would have been on the spread of epidemic diseases. I'd read as a graduate student there was an assigned book talking about the impact that epidemic diseases bring about on social change. And so I thought, well, that's a fascinating subject. So I began to explore and saw very little. I knew a little bit about the 1918 pandemic. I'd heard about it, began to explore it a little bit more. A different topic came up. That became my dissertation, but I've never lost my interest in the 1918 pandemic and the impact that diseases can have, particularly one this widespread.
So let's talk about it from a global standpoint. If you could, let's go to 35,000 feet. 1918. Where did it start? When? How impactful was it to the globe? And then let's get into how it impacted here in Greensburg and Westmoreland County.
So let's start with what you have at the same time while the pandemic is beginning. Remember, World War I is going on at the same time. So you have troop movements from countries all around the world. We don't really know where the disease began. You see almost a simultaneous outbreak in 4 places: military camps in Kansas, military camps in Boston, on the French coast, and on the northern tip of Africa. So almost simultaneously in the spring of 1918, you saw outbreaks of this very odd disease. It was a version of influenza, but it was killing 20 to 40-year-old soldiers. I mean, people in their prime of their life. Normally an epidemic or influenza kills the very young or the very old because of their weakened immune systems. This disease is killing 20 to 40-year-olds. Soldiers would be perfectly healthy, develop this, 2-3 days later, they're dead. Then late in the spring of 1918, it goes away. As the weather warms up, more outside activity, less personal interaction, the disease dissipates. By the fall of 1918, starting around September of 1918, the disease comes back with a vengeance. And in 6 weeks, will spread around the world and kill more people than HIV has killed over the 30 years that we've been battling HIV. In 6 weeks, we'll kill, best estimates are 50 million people around the world.
50 million people. That's double the population. That's what, 5 times the population of the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah, and that's probably a low estimate in that we don't have data from Russia at all because they were going through the Russian Revolution, so they weren't recording causes of deaths. Very little from China, very little data from parts of India, almost no data from Africa. We really don't know. Most, if you go with a high estimate, 100 million, 150 million people dying in 6 weeks.
We're talking to Tom Soltis. He is a professor of sociology and anthropology at Westmoreland County Community College. We're talking about his program on the Spanish Lady, the 1918 influenza epidemic. Tom, why does this... I consider myself to be a moderate history buff. I love history. I make sure that I preface that by saying I have no certification in it, but it just seems to me that this epidemic that killed 50 million people across the world doesn't get the same amount of attention that you would expect it to get.
I wish I had the answer for that. There was an author who wrote that the average college graduate knows more about the Black Death in the 14th century than about the 1918 influenza pandemic. I think what happened, Chad, is at the same time that the disease dissipated in November and December of 1918, you also had the end of World War I. Combined together, the disease killed more people than soldiers who died in World War I. Together, there was probably so much death, so much devastation that it probably to the people at the time seemed, let's just close that door and let's move on. And I think that's why we don't know much about it. I think it was one that wasn't shared, came at the same time of the end of World War I, probably just a feeling of let's get away from this bad time.
But it's not that far. It's not that far from a generation standpoint. I mean, I guess it would probably have been my great-grandmother would have had to have lived through this, and my great-grandparents. So, it's something that is not that far down the road of history. But it's interesting that it's being brought up again. I guess I don't think the right word was to say to celebrate the 100th anniversary, right? It's nearing the 100th anniversary. So what are you doing to I guess?
I go with the word
inform.
Commemorate.
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 Okay, that's probably a better word.
We're coming up on that. I call it the 100th anniversary, the commemorating the 1918 influenza pandemic. You don't celebrate 100 million deaths or anything like that. So I would call it a commemoration. I struggled with that word too. We don't want to celebrate anything like that. But what we're doing at the college, we have designed a year-long series now is what we're going to do to commemorate what happened, particularly locally here in Westmoreland County. I think history takes on much more of a meaningfulness if we can bring it to a very personal level. Like, what happened to your great-grandmother? Do we know the story of what happened? So we've designed a 4-series speaker program. It begins in October the 5th. It will be I will do the first lecture, and it's going to be titled "The Spanish Lady Invades Westmoreland County," talking about the arrival of the disease. I'll start with the overall pictures I just described to you where the disease started, but to bring it more to a local sort of a what happened in this area. The just as off the top of my head, the Greensburg Country Club was used in an emergency hospital. The YMCA in Youngwood was used as an emergency hospital because there were so many victims and so many people needed treatment that the hospital system was just overwhelmed. So the October the 5th lecture will be looking at the disease here in Westmoreland County starting in September up through the early part of 1919. Following that, on October 12th, we then have from Excella Health, we have Dr. David Wismerski, and he's going to describe how diseases are spread and how we treat diseases today. Because we still talk about outbreaks of epidemic, not just influenza, but other diseases also. How are they spread? What can we do to mitigate the danger and the harm of diseases? The following week after that, we have director of the Pennsylvania Bureau of Health Preparedness. His name's Andrew Pickett. He's going to come and do a presentation. He's titled his presentation, 100 Years Later, How We Have and Haven't Prepared for the Next Pandemic. So getting ready for what are we doing at the state level to prepare for the outbreaks of diseases. And as you see, anytime a natural, technological, or epidemiological disaster occurs, you have state involvement. So he's going to show to us what happens and how we individually can prepare for it. And then we're going to end the series on October the 24th with, from Salem University, Dr. Eric Greisinger is going to place that time period. He calls his presentation the turbulent decade from 1915 till 1925. Basically, so many other things were going on around the world. How can we place all of these events into one sort of historical idea? So you, being a history buff, would be interested in the tie-in between the disease, World War I, the Russian Revolution, beginnings of immigration, beginnings of an equal rights movement, beginnings of a civil rights movement. That period of time, there was so much happening beyond just the epidemic.
You know, it's interesting. We live in a. I guess there's no way to say that it's not a tumultuous time in this country. But you think of you go back and you think about the 1918 influenza epidemic. Just what you were saying. You've got thousands of deaths in communities. You've got immigration that's happening. You've got the end of a world war. You've got the beginning of, we're really getting it out of agriculture, going into the full scale industrial revolution. It sort of makes you think that today's environment is a little bit more calm, right?
There's hope for you as a sociologist yet. I haven't given up on you yet. That's precisely what I try to do in the class, is to show the students that as turbulent as it might be today, we're seeing a very similar sort of feeling of the changes, the uncertainty. So in that way, it was a very turbulent time. What it must have felt like, I have numerous examples, and we'll talk about the stories here in a bit, I have numerous stories where at the beginning of the week, you have a family of 7. The disease arrives by the end of the week, there's 1 or 2 of them left. What that must have felt in 4 or 5 days, you've lost parents, children, grandparents, your spouse within 2 or 3 or 4 days.
Wow, that's a cliffhanger. Oh, you're listening to the Westmoreland Community Connections. We're talking with Dr. Tom Soltis. We're going to be right back after these messages.
This is Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB. If you have a suggestion for a topic, or if your nonprofit organization would like to be featured on this program, call us during regular business hours at 724-216-1200.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.
Welcome back. You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. I'm your host, Chad Amond, president of the Westmoreland County Chamber of Commerce. My guest today is Professor Tom Soltis from Westmoreland County Community College. Tom, before we went to break, we were talking about the impact that the 1918 influenza epidemic had on Westmoreland County. I think that the piece that really hit my gut was that a family of 7 might start off on Monday with 7 healthy people, and by the next Saturday, be down to 2. Talk about what the impact must have been on this community. What were the number of deaths in Westmoreland County over the course of the epidemic?
The best estimates we have are that in the state of Pennsylvania during that period of time, there were probably around about 500,000 infections with the disease, close to probably 50,000 deaths in the state of Pennsylvania. As we come more towards Westmoreland County, we probably had about over 40,000 infections with probably close to 2,000 deaths occurring within a 6-week period of time. And what we saw was in the spring of 18, you had isolated reports of local soldiers who were sick with the disease, but at the military camps where they happened to be, whether they were at camp in Alabama or Virginia or somewhere else, you would see reports in the newspapers of this person's son or that person's son is sick with influenza. I have a report on, just to give a local sort of a sense, that there was a Private Leroy Schuster. His parents lived near Greensburg, and he died in the military camp of influenza, and that was in the spring of 1918. And then, as I said, as we get to the summer, the disease dissipates. We get to the fall, the disease arrives late part of September here in Westmoreland County. The first county death that's recorded, as far as we can tell, it was a 17-year-old high school student. Her name was Margaret Sowash. She dies on October the 5th of 1918. It's posted in the newspaper on October the 7th. Her parents had said in the news report that she had suffered for about a week or so. Then what happens is we see Youngwood ends up within a matter of a few weeks, 200, 400 cases. Greensburg will have the most infections and deaths of the county based on its population. There was a report that Export was devastated by the influenza epidemic. I have a report of a road sign outside of Ligonier that says, "Warning, the town is under quarantine. Stop at your own peril."
Wow. So Ligonier, we're talking, the studio is in Greensburg, Hempfield Township, and we're talking that 15 miles from here, the entire city was quarantined. And this isn't something that, as people that have lived in this community for a long time, this isn't something that we talk about all that often.
No, we really don't. And the reaction is phenomenal whenever most people say, I heard about it. I remember Grandma telling me about her mother had an episode or an incident, or she had a younger brother or sister who died. And that's really what I'm hoping happens also. And we can give out my contact information. I'm looking to gather the local stories that people have. And it doesn't have to be pages or even paragraphs. If anybody has a family member, I remember my grandmother told me she lost a brother during the 1918 pandemic. I would like to pull all of those stories together and to create a sort of Westmoreland County remembers the 1918 pandemic.
So this is the homework. I mean, we're talking with Dr. Tom Soltis, who is a professor at Westmoreland County Community College. He's given all of our listeners a little bit of homework. If you have maybe an aging parent out there that is in a nursing home or an assisted living facility, next time you're sitting with them, talk to them about the influenza epidemic of 1918. See if they remember any conversations that they had with their parents or their grandparents about what the impact was, and then contact Dr. Soltis. Tom, what's your contact information? How would somebody get a hold of you?
The easiest way would be through email. You can send to my email at the college, all lowercase, SOLTIST @westmoreland.edu. And, of course, you can call my office, 724-925-4239. And even if you call, just leave a message with your name and number, and I will get back in touch with you. And my goal is to collect as many of these stories and memories that people have. I had a colleague who has the office next to me, and she's probably getting tired of hearing me talking about the 1918 pandemic. But her grandmother was 94 years old. And she was visiting her grandmother doing just what you had said, Chad. And she asked her, does she remember? She'd never talked to her grandmother about the disease before. And her grandmother immediately, she said, her whole expression changed. It was like she remembered that story and that somebody wanted to hear what she wasn't born during the epidemic, but what did she hear from her parents and those who lived? And I do believe we need to preserve these stories. Very shortly, that group who even heard the stories from their parents will be gone. And I think the preservation of history becomes crucial also.
Well, I was just doing some quick math here on my notebook, and you said that over the course of 6 weeks in Westmoreland County, there was an estimate of about 2,000 deaths.
Correct.
I read the paper every day, and I look at the obituaries, and over the course of a week, there's probably about 30 or 40 obits per week, right?
Right.
So over 6 weeks, that's about 240 deaths. You're talking about 10 times the number of deaths that we have to live through right now. I can imagine, working for the Chamber of Commerce, I work with businesses every day, right? So, I mean, what kind of an impact did this have on our workforce? What kind of an impact? I would imagine that the funeral homes were probably not prepared for this kind of business. I mean, that's just some of the logistics. I mean, you take all of the mourning and all of that and put it aside. How did the community handle this?
There were shortages of caskets. What ended up happening is in some of the more further out mining towns, because so many miners were sick from the disease, carpenters in the mining towns were recruited to build wooden coffins just to meet up with the demand. Early in October, to go back to your Chamber of Commerce idea, early in October, all public amusements are ordered closed by the state of Pennsylvania. That would be pool halls, saloons, theaters, hotels, any places of public gathering were closed. In Greensburg, the Halloween on that year is canceled. There is no trick-or-treating for the children. The Columbus Day Parade is canceled. Schools were left open by the state order early in October, left to each local community to decide. Greensburg closes its schools. Youngwood closes its schools. Just about every school was closed in the area. Churches canceled their services. That was only the second time in Greensburg history that churches canceled their services. There is a report I have in one of the newspapers that said the only business that's going on is what was necessary for life. So businesses would have been impacted. People were having a difficult time to make money. Frick Coal and Coke, tied to U.S. Steel, had to lay off crews of workers because there was just not enough coal being produced. There was a physician for Carnegie Steel at that time, and he said that there's been nothing like this in the history of this country.
Wow.
At all. So the impact to just everyday life, schools are closed, churches are closed. It would have to have just been phenomenal to understand.
I see one of the notes in your presentation is that in the city of Greensburg, which obviously the city of Greensburg in 1918 would have been the most populated community
by far,
right? Yeah. In one day there were 39 deaths.
Yes.
That's stunning. So what was some of the what was the death rate? Across Pennsylvania, obviously the death rate here in Westmoreland County, but when you're talking of 1918, the city of Pittsburgh would have been a significant population. What are you doing any research on just all of Western Pennsylvania as well?
Here's what we have with in terms of statistics. Now, I've been gathering some data from Scottdale, and in their news report that what we see happening is that in the early part of the 1910, 1915 or so, the death rate overall is beginning to decline. We are beginning to control diseases, that sort of stuff. So what happens is in Pennsylvania, the death rate in 1917 is 14.8 per thousand. In 1918, the year of the pandemic, it goes up to 21.6 per thousand. So a drastic increase and a spike that you don't see again. After 1919, the death rates continue to decrease, and it is the impact of the influenza pandemic. So it probably raised the death rates by at least a third.
Wow. Well, getting back to that, trying to be a history buff, and I've heard this quote from it is put to a number of different world leaders, but I've seen it from quoted from Churchill, that those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Obviously, when you're studying history and you're studying something like this, there is value to educating the community now. What do you think that we could have learned? What should we have learned from the 1918? And what can we do as a community to make sure, or to try to make sure, that this never happens again?
Probably the scariest thing I could start with is we don't know why the disease became as deadly as it was in 1918. We don't know exactly where the disease came from. There are numerous theories. It may have originated in pigs. It may have come from ducks. It may be a version of the avian viruses that we see. It may have been horses. Something in a disease in an animal had to mutate to make it transmittable to humans that humans had never seen before. And the scary thing is that could probably happen again with. And you can think about this. We can transport ourselves around the world in less than 24 hours.
Right.
I can be from Greensburg to any part of the world in 24 hours. If I had an epidemic disease, influenza, some other disease, I could be in another country, or someone from another country could be here in 24 hours before I ever showed symptoms. And I think in that way, and that's what I think Pickett is going to show us when he does his talk, how the state is preparing for that. We saw the incredible movement of resources and people when you had the outbreak of Ebola. So epidemic diseases and their spread are just terrifying. I guess the best thing we could do is hope. Get your flu shot, those sorts of things like that. Right. But in a way, we are incredibly vulnerable.
You're listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. We've been talking with Dr. Tom Soltis. Tom, it has been great to have you on the show. If for those listeners that were intrigued by this half-hour interview, I would hope that you would be curious to attend the speaker series. The speaker series is going to be held at Founders Hall Amphitheater at Westmoreland County Community College on the Youngwood Campus. Tom, is there an online place where people can go and make sure that they're getting the dates and times correct?
Yeah, we have through the college's website, you can go to westmoreland.edu/1918 pandemic, and that will take you to a summary of the data, some photographs that we have, the schedule of our events, and this will continue on throughout the remainder of 2017. You've got me thinking back to 1918. Throughout the remainder of 2017 and through the year of 2018. We're doing a year-long commemorative series of events.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for the work that you've done on this, for educating the community, and for all the work you do out at the community college. You've been listening to Westmoreland Community Connections on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB and on the web at WHJBFM.com. Join us next week, same time, same place, when we make more Westmoreland Community Connections. Thanks for listening.
This has been Westmoreland Community Connections, a look at issues and happenings in and around Westmoreland County. Join us again next week on Classic Hits 107.1 WHJB.
Westmoreland Community Connections is a presentation of the Westmoreland Drug and Alcohol Commission.